Halacha Zayin. Tafanal Halacha Zayin. Yesh Mish Omer. The kapois hasuis mikeren, spoons that are made out of horns, bones. Aim them takon bagol. You can't catch them. They keep them shemiskakon b'mayim chamen, since they could get ruined with hot water. Hashin demachayslayo. So we're afraid that the person is going to be too worried about breaking it, and therefore he won't do a proper. Correct. Well, that's the first thing is that an assumption that you can cash it. That's really the next halacha. That we assume that you can cash it. In theory, you can cash it, but you're not allowed to cash it because you might break it. And therefore, you won't do a good job because you'll be afraid of breaking it. Okay. So this halacha, that part of it, which is the main part of halacha, which is that if you're afraid of breaking something through Hag'alah, you're not allowed to cash it. So you think it's pretty straightforward. We had it was in the first halacha. It's a Gemara that says that if you're going to do libun to a kli and it's going to break, and you might be afraid of breaking it, you're not allowed to do libun. So over here, the Rishonim says Hag'alah is the same kind of thing also. So it seems very, at face value, it seems very straightforward. Okay, but the problem is that actually the halacha is very difficult to understand as follows. The Torah brings this in without any chos. He just brings it as like the Mechav does. The Shulchan says this thing comes from a kol. And he says, and the Kabbalah also brings that others are Mako. That's all he says. The Bach brings more of the words of the Kabbalah. I didn't see it inside. And then later people brought even more of it. That the people who are Mako say like this. They say, there's no, by Libun, it makes sense to say that the guy might be afraid to break it. Because Libun needs to be at a very specific temperature. So I could have used it, cooked hot dogs at 400 degrees. And now I have the kasha that's saying not at 400 degrees, but at 1400 degrees. So I'm going to afraid to break it. But Hag'alah is Kabbalah Kastoltik. So however I used the kli the first time, when I cooked the food, I used it with hot isser or hot chametz at a certain temperature. So that's why I have to kasher that. So however, if I wasn't afraid to cook with it at that temperature, why should I be afraid to kasher at that temperature? Right, it's like obvious to them. Right, that's you're going to see it. Everyone who's talked about this, all the people we're going to mention, are assuming. It's something that really only the later Achronim really say, the contemporary Achronim, that if you cook at 150 degrees, you catch at 150 degrees. So it's the modern Achronim we talk about it. We've mentioned this before. It's only modern Achronim because nowadays you have thermometers and we have such exact cooking. You go to a factory and they cook at exactly the temperature. There's what to talk about. In the old days, this wasn't such a real child. But everyone here you're going to hear talking about it is assuming like that.
I mean, which is that's the same.
Right, exactly. Well, see, there you could answer Koyom Nasagil Chaver because you cook a pot usually instead of boil. You could just assume, you cook the boil and then you cook the next day boil. But the Bach asked, and you're going to see, everyone else is going to say this, that his understanding, it's just Kabbalah Kafpolte. The blia happened at a certain temperature, so you're kasher at that temperature. You weren't afraid to cook like that, so why should you be afraid to kasher like that also? Not only does the Bach bring this like that, if you know the Sharatzin says it sort of Lamaisa, at the end of Pasuk Aleph, it's halacha about glass. So there's a machlokes Rishonim whether glass is balerna, and whether you can kasher it. And the Sharatzin brings that there's a ritzvah that says the reason why really glass can be kasher like every other material. But the reason why now the kasher glass is because you'll be afraid when you kasher it, you're going to crack it. Okay, glass until modern times couldn't handle heat, so you'll be afraid when you're going to put it into the boiling water, it's going to crack the glass. So that's what the Sharatzin says that the Ritzvah says why you're not on kasher glass because you're afraid to break it. And the Sharatzin says So the Sharatzin says why does everybody else argue on this? He brings something wrong. He says why does everybody else argue on that? And they don't consider that. And because they hold the same way you use the glass at a certain temperature. So Kabbalah Kafpolte, you're kasher at that temperature also. You weren't afraid to use it. You weren't afraid to use it when you at that temperature when you cooked with it or when you made your food with it. So why would you be afraid to kasher with it also? So the Sharatzin says this svara. He says lamaisa like that. That there's no problem of being afraid to break a kli through Hag'alah because however you use it, that's how you're going to kasher. So so back to the box kasher. How could the Mechaber say that you can't kasher came with Hag'alah if you're going to be afraid to break it? How can you be afraid to break it? However you used it, that's how you're going to kasher. Okay? But the Bach is not even saying it as his own kasher. He's bringing it as the yesh mekilim. What the Beis Yosef says, there are those who are mekel. He brings it, and the Bach says, no. He says, I'll tell you, he says, when you cook in a pot, over a whole year you use it for chametz. So usually you use it, let's say, at 150 degrees. Maybe one time you use it at 160 degrees. And so once in a while you use that, okay, so nothing happened, but you'll be afraid to kasher for the 160 degrees. So therefore, the reason why you can't kasher, you're right, the usual temperature that you cook at, you're not afraid to use that again. But maybe you one time use it at a hotter temperature, which really is very...
No, so
that's the kasher. That's going to be the question, rega. But the box says that's the pshat in the machmir, and it says the mekilim are, I forgot the words that he uses, that it's a very far-fetched shita, and therefore he says you should be machmir. But the kasha is, it was the halacha before this, said that you follow Rosh Tashmishay. So this is mamash a classic case of Rosh Tashmishay. Every day of the week you use this clay at 150 degrees, and one time you use it at 160 degrees. So that's mamash a classic case of Rosh Tashmishay. The Mechaber himself, the last halacha said, you follow Rosh Tashmishay. So the Bacha thing, the reason to be machmir is because maybe you want to use it at the hotter temperature, you won't want to kasha there. No. So that doesn't bother the Mechaber. And even the Ramah says that we're machmir from Miyat Tashmishay. So the occasional use like this, you have to be kasher like that also. But we said that the Achronim say it's really a Ramah in your day that if being choshesh from Miyat Tashmisha will mean you can't kasher the Klei, then you don't have to. So here we have a Klei. At 150 degrees you can handle. Once you use it at 160 degrees, and that you'd be afraid to kasher it. Okay, fine. Then you don't have to kasher it. You don't have to be choshesh 160 degrees. Even the Ramah who's machmir from Miyat Tashmisha is only if that'll let you kasher it. If it'll mean you can't kasher it, so let you don't have to kasher it. Okay, so the din of the Mechaber is, this whole din is very hard to understand. So what seems so straightforward, we take it pashut that if you're afraid to break something during kashering, you can't kasher. It's very hard to understand. I'm going to say some answers, but you'll see that none of them are very terribly convincing. Okay, so one of the Achronim who talks about it is the Tzitzel Yasser of Baltimore, who says his tshuva is about kashering plastic. Okay, he in general talks about kashering plastic, and he talks about this point. You see, the shayla is that plastic can melt, and therefore maybe you should be able to kasher because you're afraid you're going to ruin the klei. That's one of the person's questions. So he talks about this question that I'm telling you now, and he says, well, you're going to like this. If you look at the Mechaber, it starts with yesh misha omer. The kappas can't be kasher like this. So you see that he doesn't really hold of it so much. He only calls it yesh misha omer. Only some people say like that. So you see that he's not so convinced of it. No, he doesn't do the other sheet. So he says no. This is maybe he brings a right from an Achron, and maybe the Mechaber doesn't mean it so much, and because he said a second ago that you don't have to question to me for a teshuvah. So as you can imagine, he's not very thrilled with that, as with nobody else sees. Okay, because really, the others say that when the Mechaber says yesh misha omer, it just means is when someone said a new din that hasn't ever been brought before. It's not like a Gemara, not like a Beferish din, so he calls it yesh misha omer, just because it's not based on a firm source as other things are. But not that because he doesn't hold it. He doesn't make any other days. Okay, and then he says, then the Tzitzel says he says, but the Ramah. He says, I know why the Ramah agrees, because you have to question even for me, Tashmishay. Okay, so to that, but he doesn't say this, but we said ourselves that you can't say the Ramah is because of me, Tashmishay, because Ramah says that don't mean you can't catch the Klei, then you don't have to question for me, Tashmishay. I'm going to repeat the question, because the rest of the question is, the Mechaber in Halacha Zayin says, if you're afraid you're going to break a Klei with Hag'alah, then you can't catch it, okay, which is not a Gemara. The Gemara is about Libun. And the Shaila is, what in the world, and this is Rishonim who argue on it, says that why should you say that you can't kasher it? However you used it, that's how you're going to kasher it. Kabbalah kapolta. If you use it at a certain temperature, 150 degrees, you kasher at 150 degrees. How could you be afraid to break it? That's how you use it all the time. Okay? So now, I'm going to mention this, repeat it just for Yossi, which is...
For the temperature business, Kabbalah kapolta, it's a recent invention.
So that I mentioned that I'm repeating this just for you. That everybody who's talking about this today, all these Achronim are assuming that the Kabbalah kapolta goes within temperatures also. It's the recent Achronim who mention it because it's a lamaisic thing nowadays. We have a thermometer. You have a company that cooks exactly so 140 degrees every time, so you can think about kasher. It wasn't such a real hechatimsa 100 years ago to do like that. But everyone was talking about this. All the people who were talking about today, who are talking about this, are assuming that within Hag'alah you could also do temperatures instead of 100. There isn't a set line that you always have to kasher at a certain temperature. That whatever it is, whatever the bli was, that's how much you have to kasher. That's an assumption. That's an underlying assumption.
You're saying kasher is not kasher. You're answering the question.
That one.
That's not true. Then they really Hag'alah.
No. No, I'm saying everyone here keeps saying, why would a person be afraid to break it? However much hot water it took during the when the issue got into it, that's how much you have to use when you kasher it. They're assuming that you could kasher at that temperature.
And you're answering that question.
No, I'm not answering the question. No, I'm answering why is it only that the modern Achronim talk about such a musag? Why do they bring it up? Okay. They bring it up because nowadays it's a shiloh that's halacha l'maisa.
But why do you think it's a good answer though?
That why?
That's why it's not a kasher, because they did it in rice. They were magal. They didn't have thermometers or whatever. They were magal always in rice. That's why the Shulchan says them too.
No, but why would the guy be magal in rice? So let's say he used his spoon only in teacups. Okay, he wouldn't use it in a pot. He would only use it in a teacup. Let's say in a klisheni. So what would you say? So kasher in a klisheni, just like you always stick it into your tea like that. So stick it into your Hag'alah like that also. However you use it, when you use it.
Let's say he uses it in the Klei Rishon, and since you don't have the temperature.
Right, no. The guy uses it in the Klei Rishon. Is he afraid of breaking it when he sticks into the Klei Rishon?
Not at rice, and not at what is less than rice when he's not afraid.
However he's comfortable, whatever he does when he's cooking, however he uses it, that's how much he uses it. The same hashara he could use in.
So what is the answer then?
So that's what we're talking about. Okay, so we did some try so far. I'm repeating about this part because just you see from everyone here that they're assuming that within temperatures you can take Kabbalah Kach Polti also. I believe it was at 150, like the modern Achronim say. So they're all assuming that.
Which Achronim is discussion?
We started with Bach. Okay, it's really Rishonim. The Beis Yosef who brings Rishonim who argue about this din, the ones who are makel for exactly this reason. That's what it is. Okay, so now
the Bach is discussion?
Yeah, the Bach brings Rishonim. It brings Rishonim who say the other sheet. He's trying to understand why should you be machmer. The Beis Yosef said the din is to be machmer v'yesh mekilin, and he's bringing the other Rishonim, and they're trying to say what's calculated, right? Okay, so Daniel Weiss has 4 answers to this question. Okay, 4 more answers to this question. You'll see, and he tells you himself that 3 of them he has the obvious questions on them, and there's going to be one that he has within reason. Okay, but 4 answers. He says maybe the Achronim say that when the Mechaber says if you have a kli made out of bone, out of keren, out of horns, I don't know what you can call it, okay, you're afraid to break it. They say you should know also, what happens if you just have the handles made out of that? Or you just have a glue that's holding the different parts together that also might also break. So they say, so in that case you also can't do Hag'alah because you're afraid of melting the glue, or you're afraid of breaking the handle. So he says, well, we had in Halacha Gimel that if you have a knife and you occasionally poke food on the fire with that, if for Pesach you're allowed to do Hag'alah. Okay, based on a bunch of tziruf, you're allowed to do Hag'alah. And in that case, you got to do a full Hag'alah to the Kli. You're getting away with Hag'alah, but you're going to have to do a full Hag'alah in Rosh. So here we have a case where you use it at a certain temperature, but you have to do the Hag'alah at Rosh. So maybe this that we say that you're afraid you're going to break it is because you have to do it at a hotter temperature than you usually do. Usually you just poke it onto the fire for a second. But and even the handle barely gets hot altogether. But when you're going to have to do a full Hag'alah in Rosh, now you're afraid you're going to break it.
In such a specific case.
So that's exactly his question, is that what are you talking about? We didn't say that it's only for that specific case. Not only that, he says the case this is only an Achronim's invention later on. The Mechaber says it's a kapos Kashrus mikaren. The spoon itself is made out of karen. Okay, so what is he talking about? So he says he answers himself that it's hard to say that's the pshat in the din. Okay, next answer. He says, you know the rule is that you can only be samech on lo tashmishay if you haven't used it for the secondary use within the past 24 hours. Because Rod Tashmisha assumes that it's Ein Ben Yomen, so it's only Nisa Drabana. Since it's only Nisa Drabana, you can be Samech on Rod Tashmisha. So if within 24 hours you use it for the other use, then you're not allowed to be Samech on Rod Tashmisha. So he says, well, sometimes you might use this spoon within 24 hours for the higher temperature, the occasional higher temperature. He says, so maybe there's a light plug. Since sometimes within 24 hours you use it for the secondary use, so you always have to, we throw out the din of Rod Tashmisha because of a light plug that occasionally will be within 24 hours, so even if it's not within 24 hours, you still have to be machmer. Okay, so he says that would be very nice. If we make up such a light plug, very nice. He says the only problem is that Halacha Vav was all about Rav Tashmisha. How come no one said anything in Halacha Vav? Halacha Vav said you could be talking about Rav Tashmisha, assuming, of course, that you know that it has to be Ein Ben Yomen. So why doesn't anybody say it over there? This is the wrong place to say it. We just finished the Halacha Rav Tashmisha. Okay, a third answer he tries. He said there's a rif that holds that when you kasher something, you have to leave it in the water for a certain amount of time. Okay, you have to leave it in there for a certain amount of time in the rosh. So he says maybe the kli can handle hot for a second or two, but if you leave it there for a long time, how long it's going to take to do Hag'alah, then it's not going to be able to handle it. So you'll be afraid to...
When you cook for a second.
So no, let's say you stir a pot. You just stir the pot for a second. Use the spoon to stir a pot. So that, for a second like that, you could do it. But to keep it in the Hag'alah water for a long time, that you're not going to be able to do. Okay? So he tells you, obviously, this territory brings from somebody else. The obvious question on that is that that's not the din. The din is that doesn't take anything. Hag'alah just takes a second. As soon as the Klei goes into the water, the bleeds come right out. So very nice is such a shita, and maybe the machmirim hold like that shita. That's fine, that's okay. But then it wouldn't be the halacha l'maisa. Then it wouldn't be sitting here.
The Bible clearly says that for a second. I don't the next one.
I don't remember. I don't remember if it's befavors, but I think it's Tuffman Bays. He brings the shita and he doesn't like it. Okay,
you said that it has to get hot.
Right. I told you at the time that that's not a minhadin. I don't mean that's not minhadin.
So this is one. That's the minhadin is 1 second.
Right. That's 1 second. But this Belsky said was that even though the Hag'alah only takes 1 second, okay, but it doesn't make sense that you could just dunk it and take this tremendous cold, drop it in and take it out, and it should still be cold. So when we say 1 second means that it got hot, and then stayed in for a second.
If you make sense of that, all the bleeds come out in a second. If you make sense of it,
then you could what?
If you make sense of all the bleeds come out in a second, it also makes sense of a cold Klei. It's the same problem.
That a cold Klei? Oh, I mean the Klei could stay cold. Okay. Okay. Oh, so but I mean, according to our Rebbe, you have an incident. But he'll say is that even him, it takes a few seconds till it gets heated up. Also, maybe it's like that. Okay, maybe that's an incident. Because it takes a couple of seconds till it gets to the start-off temperature. Okay. So now his own answer is, Diane Rice's own answer is like this. He says, if I use the Klei at a certain temperature, and now I need to kasher it. So the normal thing a person should do is, they need to kasher it, is they should make the water a certain amount hotter than the temperature that you use, just because they can never be sure you can get it at the right temperature. You usually use it at a certain amount, so you in being cautious, should make it a little hotter than it was to be sure. You don't know how to judge if it was exactly right. So you make it a little hotter to be sure. He says, and what's going to happen is, if you have a Klei that's very sensitive and it could break at high temperatures, your caution is going to go the other way. You're going to say, if I make this too hot, I might break the Klei. So we'll use a number. Let's say if it was you cooking at 150 degrees. So from the Kashering side, the smart thing is to go to 160 degrees. Say I have a margin of error, so I go to 160 degrees. But if you're afraid of breaking the Klei, you can go to 140 degrees because you say, 150 might be too close. So you can go to 140 degrees. So instead of being cautious, l'chumra, and making the Hag'alah at a little bit of a higher temperature, you're going to be cautious l'chumra for the sake of the Klei and kasher at a lower temperature. So he's saying, and this is especially true when you think about it, kasher without a thermometer, not like nowadays in a company with a thermometer. When you kasher just based on I usually use it like this and like that. So now it's completely up to the person's judgment as to does he going to do it at the right temperature or not. So the sensible thing would be to go a little higher, and the lamaisa is the guy's going to go a little lower because he's afraid of breaking it. So therefore, you're not even going to get the Kabbalah Kachpolta. To get Kabbalah Kachpolta, you have to do it to get Kabbalah Kachpolta, you'd have to do a little bit above the temperature you used to that, and instead you can go the opposite way. Okay, I can't say that's terribly convincing. It's the best answer there is. And again, back to the beginning. I don't think that there's a great answer to this question, unless you could say, you can only say is maybe there's no such thing within Hag'alah. There's no levels. There's no Kabbalah Kachpolta within Hag'alah. But what the modern Achronim say, the contemporary Achronim say, that at 100, if you bleed at 150 degrees, you can kasher 150 degrees. Maybe that's completely wrong. And the other Rishonim completely disagree with that, and everything has to be at rosh. Okay? Right now, there are people who hold like that. I'm not saying there aren't people nowadays who hold like that, but it's very much accepted, and I'm telling you that all the Achronim who are talking about.
Yeah. That's how we learned also. All right. Remember that?
He said Kabbalah Kachpolta.
But you only have to kasher Kabbalah Kachpolta.
Yeah.
And all the Achronim who are talking about over here are assuming not like that. But maybe that is. If that's true, again, the Svar is like the people say nowadays that Kabbalah Kachpolta works within temperatures also. Just like that din over there. It started off as a din in Libam Hag'alah and went to Klei Rishon Klei Sheni, and there's no reason why within temperatures it shouldn't be the same thing also. Okay, but
isn't this what Yitzchak and the Chulum of Hag'alah brings up? He brings up back.
he talks about whether for Libun you should take Kabbalah Kafot. That's what he talks about for Libun. For Hag'alah, there's no such thing. For Libun, he talks about he wants to say that maybe you could even say Kabbalah Kafot for Libun, meaning that Libun also draws out the Bli instead of burning it up. Okay, which everybody disagrees with. Everybody says that Libun burns the Bli.
All you do is Kabbalah Kafot and Be'esh instead of a bishul.
Correct. But that's not accepted. That's like way not accepted. That's a very big chiddush. Everybody says that Libun means burns the Bli as opposed to drawing out the Bli. But in drawing out the Bli,
he says about using whether you need rice and it's not true. Using the same temperature, I think makes my colleagues out every week.
Okay, so you're wrong? Okay.
I can't remember what it is.
Of course you do. Okay, fine. Okay, so that's the thing. So the point really was just to bring up the question, which is that the thing that seems very straightforward, and we take it as obvious, that if you're afraid of breaking a kli, you're not allowed to kasher it, is by no means so straightforward. So let's talk about ches. It's not as long. Echad kli etz, echad kli even, echad kli matzes, dinam hachshir Hag'alah. All these different kind of kelim you can kasher Hag'alah. And the Ramah says, v'chein kli etzim tzrich Hag'alah. Also kli etzim need Hag'alah. And the Mishnah points out that kli etzim and kli keren are almost exactly the same thing. And the kli etzim means the more solid ones that can handle the heat, and kli keren, which was the halacha before, are the more delicate ones that can't handle the temperature. Okay. Now, just within this din, the kli even that the Mechaber mentions, that he just says it in passing, kli eitz, kli even, kli matzes, you should know that there are really three sheets. The Mishnah brings three sheets about this. Some hold that it's like cheres, and it can't be kasher at all. It's belay, it can't be kasher at all. Some hold like what we say, which is it is belay and it can be kasher. And some hold that it's not belay at all, completely not belay. Okay, so three opposite extremes. Okay, some hold that it's not belay b'chlal. Okay, which we find that hard to understand because of all the kelim that we know of that are belay that we have nowadays. We don't see any bleas in metal, and we do see bleas in stone. Okay, there is bleas in, we see it, and they'll tell you when you get someone gets a granite counter. If you don't seal the counter, you'll get stains in it. The stuff will mamish get absorbed into it. Okay, so which makes you wonder that if someone could say that stone is not belay, meaning that would have to be to say is that little bit that goes in, that doesn't count. That's like a nothing. So you can only imagine then what used to go into metal then. If what we think is a blia is so little, some people can even say it's nothing.
When you say like stone,
you don't see, if you have a sealed stone counter, you won't see it. Right. If you have an unsealed, if you don't seal granite counter, it will get stains in it. They'll absorb the food that you cook on it, that you put on it. They'll absorb into it. Or you go into take a piece of concrete and you can see yourself that it absorbs. Concrete is different. Okay, I mentioned that. I shouldn't say that. Concrete is Kashrus. Okay, I'm going to leave that on the side. Okay.
You said the bone is the same thing?
Bone is the same as what?
Karen. As
whether it absorbs or not?
Yeah. Didn't you just say that?
No, I said bone in this din is the same as Karen in the din beforehand. Both have the same din to them. Oh. Just that the bone is the more solid one that the Ramos says you can kasher. You just do Hag'alah to it. And in the din before, we said that you can't kasher them because you might break them. But absorbing wise, they're the same. Just that the Klei Keren are more sensitive, they're easier to break, and therefore you can't kasher them. That's the separate thing. Okay. So now the Magen Avraham says, what's the difference between Klei Adamah and Klei Cheres? They're both the same stuff. If you take
what? What's the difference between Klei Even and Klei Cheres or Klei Adamah?
Klei Adamah.
You mentioned Klei Adamah anyway.
It's the same thing. Klei Adamah and Klei Even, that's the same. That's reasonably the same thing. What? It's both. I mean, they both. Something you just scoop it out of the ground, either a rock or sand out of it. And cheres, what do you make cheres? Is you take clay out of the ground and you make it and you burn it and it turns into cheres.
So what's stone is a hard rock stone. Okay. You took dirt and you mushed it together. That's like cheres.
Okay, so called Klei Adamah. The question is the same. It's the same point. I'll tell you what he said because the point is his answer, which is the difference. What makes it into cheres is not something that comes out of the ground can't be kasher, but if you take it, you put into a kiln and you make these huge changes in the kli. It used to be like this and it becomes like that. That's what makes it. That creates a Klei Cheres, makes it very porous and makes it able to absorb so much that you can't do Hag'alah to it. Okay, but where you can take the sand out of the ground by itself, the Klei Adamah, if you just take some dirt, smash it together and let it dry and turn it into a pot, that would not be Klei Cheres and you could catch that kli. Okay, so this is bricks. Okay, so if you take bricks. The normal way to make bricks is to make them like cheres. You take the sand out of the ground, and the clay out of the ground, then you form it into the shape, and then you put it into a kiln. You bake it, and then it turns into a brick, it becomes a Klei Cheres. Okay? But if you just...
It's the heat.
It's the heat that makes the change into it. But if you just take dirt out of the ground and you make a clod of something and you let it dry out to become just a dried out brick like that, that would not be Klei Cheres, and you could kasher it. Even though it's reasonably the same material, you wouldn't be able to kasher it.
The Chazon Ish argues with that.
Okay.
He says, Klei Adamah, because he says, no, it can't be better than Klei Cheres. He says you can't kasher it.
You cannot kasher it?
You cannot kasher Klei Cheres. I think he prefers argues on it. I'm not going to burn with it.
Okay. Okay, fine. Now we could take the Magen Avraham, what he says, one step further, which is, you know that when you make metal, Kalim, when you make metal doesn't come out of the ground looking like a shiny Barberware pot. Okay, it comes out of the ground, and it's also put into a huge fire in order to make it the way it is. Okay, but the difference is that when you put metal into a fire, all you're doing is you're burning away the impurities, all the junk that's there, you're burning that away, and you liquefy the metal, but that's not doing anything to the metal. The metal is of a different nature. It can handle the heat better, and nothing happens to it. Then when it solidifies, it turns just into pure metal, as opposed to metal with other impurities in it. So the metal hasn't been, so it's not so much that it's made with heat. It's not that it's processed with heat. It's that the heat that processes it makes a big change into it. It goes from being clay into Klei Cheres, as opposed to going from metal into metal. Metal didn't get changed by the heat. Okay, so it's not the heat per se. It's the heat making a change that makes a difference. Okay? And this, really, we're not doing glass now, but this is the basis for the machlokes about glass, is that glass gets processed just like Cheres does. Instead of taking clay, you take sand, you put it into huge amounts of heat, and it turns into a whole different thing. It changes from sand, like on the beach, turns from sand into being a piece of glass. Okay, so that huge change sure seems like Cheres. Everything about it looks like Cheres. But the other side is that the finished product doesn't seem anything like Cheres. The finished product is sheave, like bala. It seems so smooth that it doesn't seem possible to be bala, as opposed to Cheres. You look at the bottom of your mug, you'll see it looks like it's very much able to absorb. Okay, so that's the machlokes about glass is based on that. Okay, so based on this Magen Avraham, we understand that this should be obvious, which is you can't, things that come naturally out of the ground, that just come out of the ground as is, you could kasher, just notwithstanding. Meaning, if you take, I'm not going to say, if you take, let's say, rubber, okay, it comes out of a tree, okay, not artificial plastic, but real rubber that comes out of latex, it comes out of a tree, or asbestos, which is also it's fibers that come out of the ground. Those are things that can be kashered because the mom is taken out of the ground. There's nothing done to them to make any change in them. They are as is. They're like natural, so to speak. As is, they come out, and they can be kashered because they're just plain things out of the ground, and they are soon to be able to be kashered. If you go to the opposite, the other side is the bricks and cement and things like that. Those things are real cheres, and they can't be kashered. And in fact, cement is not such an unusual thing. Really huge tanks are made out of, or like big things could be made out of cement, and they can't be kashered. Okay? And cement is really cheres, ground up and mixed with other things to make something else.
Okay, so they can't be kashered because that is...
Because it's cheres.
It's fired up.
Yeah, cement is made, in order to make cement, if I remember correctly, the word cement refers to cheres, which is ground up. Then you mix it together with other things to create concrete. Okay, we use those words like interchangeably, but really one is the cheres, which is ground up, and that powder is mixed with sand and some other things, and then it turns into concrete.
Something that went through an oven.
Right, it's first into a regular oven, but when you finish it, you grind it up into a powder. When you finish that thing, I believe that's called cement. That first thing you create and you grind up is called cement, and then you mix it with sand and some other things, and you make what we call concrete. I think those two, they're not the same thing. One is the ingredient, and one is the finished product. Okay, but the finished product, and we see ourselves that it's porous. I mean, when it rains, the sidewalk gets different colors. I mean, you could see that it's porous. Okay. So now, just a side thing, which we're not going to do now, which is the mechaber. The first thing was echad klei, that you can kasher wood. Okay. It does not say wood in the Torah that you can kasher it. It's an assumption that one making that you can kasher, that the Rishonim are making that you can kasher wood. Maybe I think it's even a Gemara that you can kasher wood. Okay, which is negates the side of plastic. What happens if you have a material that's not in the Torah? Could you kasher it or not? The implication here is that if there are new things that will come along, or things that aren't mentioned in the Torah, you could potentially kasher them as long as they're not cheres. And there's a little bit of a diyun here about why aren't you concerned that the end will get stuck in it, because wood will get cracked and nicks and things like that. So how do you kasher a piece of wood? It's usually not smooth and has bumps and cracks in it. But I'm going to wait for that for a later halacha, in halacha chaf aleph, I think it is. Within some more of a diyun about that. by having little bits of the end left in the thing, but that's for water. I'm going to leave that.